Hey everyone, in this video I'm going to take you through an introduction to APIs. Every week I get questions from bubblers who want to understand APIs, what they're used for, how they work in Bubble apps, and a lot of you know you need an API for something, but you're not really sure where to begin. So this intro is going to help you find a clear way into this space because APIs can be intimidating at first, but that's why we're here now. So I'm going to go through some definitions and examples to help you stand up here. All right, so first, API stands for Application Programming Interface. What does that even mean? The easiest way to think about it is an API is like a messenger, okay? Your website or app will request data from an external server that stores that data. So you're handing off the information that you want to the API, the messenger, and that API will take it to the external server. That external server will respond by sending a message back through the API back to you. And that response will be formatted, and it'll actually be formatted in a way that lets you extract things very easily. Okay, so APIs allow applications to talk to each other. It's just a way to have things communicate, and it's the in-between. It's what actually creates that connection. So again, your app will request data from an external server, and that server is what stores the data. And that external server will receive the request, it will process it, it will make sure that everything's formatted properly and that you actually have authorization to be making this request, and then it will return a response. And usually that response will contain the data that you requested. In other cases, the response might just give you like a success message or an error. So this is actually a lot like going to a website in your browser, and I'm going to take you over here to my browser just to show you. So let's say we went to facebook.com/CentralParkNYC. So this is just Central Park's Facebook page. So this is what we've done. The browser has made a request to Facebook, and it's made a request at this URL. So it wants a very specific resource from Facebook. Facebook has received the request, and what it will return in response is the HTML code that displays this page, because at this URL, this is what we want to see. This URL is meant to display this nicely visual presentation of all of the data for Central Park. Now, if I wanted to make the same request for the same data through the API, this is what I get. I'm going to type in a different URL here, and it's going to be graph.facebook.com v210. This is just the API version that Facebook is on right now. And we're going to go to the same Central Park NYC resource. So graph.facebook.com, it's not facebook.com. We're on a subdomain of Facebook. This is the root directory of Facebook's API. So this is a different location. What we get in response is not an HTML display. It is instead just the pure data for this Central Park resource. So I'm going to hit enter. Now, the response that we got was an error message. This isn't what we wanted. We didn't want an error. We wanted the data. But the error message is saying that I need an access token to make the request. Thankfully, I do have an access token, so I'm going to add that really quick. And I'm going to go over this type of thing in just a moment. But basically, it needed a password for me to be able to retrieve the data via API. But ultimately, this was the URL that we navigated to. And you can see that this is it. This is the data. It's in this raw format here. We have the name and we have the ID. Now, obviously, this resource has a lot more information associated with it. It has photos, it has reviews, people who have commented, all of that stuff. The reason we're not seeing it here is because we've really just accessed the very top level of the Central Park resource. In order to get all of that other information, we would need to be a little bit more specific with our request. And we can do that with additional parameters. Just like I added this access token, you can continue to add more parameters like this to make more specific requests and get other data back. Now I'll talk a little bit more about parameters in a moment, but I do want to jump over to this other API service here to give you another example of the kind of data you can expect to see when you receive a response. This is called REST countries, and this is purely data. There is no front-end display with pages where you can view country information. It's actually up to you to develop and design an application that connects to the data and then displays it in whatever way you want. Let's go to just their general resource here to view all of their country data. This is a really handy little service, actually. It gives you so much information about every country in the world. So I'm going to copy this URL here and paste it there. And this doesn't require any authorization, but here we go. Here we see all of our data. This is every single country that they have in their data set. And you can see for every country they have a lot of different pieces of information, like currencies that are used, time zones, which other countries border the country that you're looking at, languages, all of this stuff. It's very, very cool, and it's organized alphabetically. But we can see just, this is the entire response, is all this data here. So if I go back one, and I go to a different resource, maybe we want to look up countries by the currency that's used. So I can go copy this endpoint here, and I'll go through terminology in just a second, but I'm going to paste in this other endpoint. So now we're at the currency resource, and this is telling me that I need to define what currency I want to use. Let's do the Mexican peso. Okay, and you can see that only Mexico comes back. That's the only country in the world that uses that currency. Let's change it to something like the USD, and we get a handful more countries that use the US dollar. So this is a really simple example of how you can modify some of these endpoints that take different values to get different information. But again, we're accessing this information through a web browser because these are web-based APIs. So let's take a small step back. What can you do with APIs? Really, when we're talking about our Bubble apps and APIs connecting to other services, we're talking about creating integrations with other services so that your users have a more seamless experience on your app. They don't have to leave your app to view Facebook data, to view that country data. They can view all of the data directly inside of your app, and they can also have that external service make changes to the data too. So a user can actually read or write to and from an external server without ever leaving your app. An example of this would be, let's say that this is your app, this blue one here. You send a request to, let's say this is Facebook, and your request was, hey, go update my profile picture, or maybe go like that comment. And what Facebook will do is it'll receive your request, it'll make sure that everything is formatted properly, that you have the proper authorization, and it'll make that change on your behalf. And you don't ever have to leave. This is like a background process. You make the request, Facebook takes it, does what it needs to do, and it'll always send a response back. So if you just want to retrieve data, like give me a list of all my Facebook friends, then that response will contain that data. But if your request is like, go make a change to my Facebook account, it'll do that, but it'll still send a response back with a success or error message letting you know that it went through, or maybe there was a problem. So again, users can read and write data to and from an external service, and they don't ever have to leave your app. So this is a great way of creating integrations with the outside world. Let's go through some terminology here that you're going to run into when you read API documentation with different services that you want to connect to. So in general, an API for a website is code that allows two programs to communicate. But we're specifically going to be talking about RESTful APIs, okay? REST stands for Representational State Transfer, and you can think of REST as an API language, okay? So APIs can actually happen in multiple languages, some offline, some online. We're talking about web-based online language that is most commonly used for internet access so that your online users can connect to cloud services. Okay, so anything like Facebook, Google, Amazon, anything that offers a REST API, that's going to be the most compatible with Bubble apps. And at the heart of a RESTful API is the client-server relationship. So your app is the client that connects to an external services server. Okay, the client makes a request to the server responds to the client. Okay, again, this is like your browser connecting to a website on the internet. So the browser is the client, and the website is hosted on a server. Okay, and that server for the website will return a response back to the browser so that your browser can display information. And traditionally, when you're just going on a regular website page, you'll get an HTML response and you see a beautifully designed web page. But with APIs, you get data back. And there are a few more characteristics of a RESTful API too. So resources. A RESTful API is going to organize data in a directory style format. So you can think of it like accessing folders on your computer. You can have a folder and then you can have subfolders underneath, and you can continue to embed things in this hierarchy structure until you ultimately get to the file that you want. The data in a RESTful API is organized in a very similar format. So each data set has its own address within the directory. Okay, so just like we looked at, let's go switch back over here. So if we want to look at countries by currency, this is the address that we want to go to. We want to go to v2/currency. If we want to look it up by language, v2/language. And then you can continue to filter things down by the actual language, by the actual currency. So these are the addresses of each of these data sets. Now the technical term for this address is a URI, and there are actually different types of URIs, different types of addresses, but the more common one that you're going to be working with is a URL. But we don't call these addresses as URLs when we're in an API environment. A URL is actually known as an endpoint when we are in an API environment. So an endpoint is a type of URI. Just know that when you're looking through documentation and you see references to URI, really all we're talking about are these addresses here. Now, all of the data that's involved, either in a request or response, is going to be structured in a specific way within this directory style format. So it's actually going to be represented by either a JSON or XML object. And you can just think about this as the way that the data is written. So I'm going to jump back over to the countries data set here, and this is formatted as a list of JSON objects, otherwise known as an array of JSON objects. So each object is each country. So you can see up here, you've got your brackets, quotes, everything separated by a comma. There are rules to follow when you want to structure data as any type of object, whether it be XML, JSON, CSV. There's a lot of different types of objects that you can send and receive data as, but the most common one, and the one that you really want to look out for to make sure that it's compatible with Bubble, is JSON, which is like this, or XML. And I'm not going to get into the details of the specifics of how JSON objects are structured, because you have rules within here, but just know that these are the types of objects that are compatible with Bubble, and Bubble does work with both. Now let's talk about the requests themselves. First of all, I'm going to now refer to requests as calls, because that's actually the term that you're going to see in documentation and within the Bubble tools for making API requests. These are known as calls. So every call has to indicate what type of method it's using, and there are 5 to choose from. So you've got get, post, put, patch, and delete. When you make a call as a get method, you are usually going to retrieve data in order to display, to save, to just read. You just want to receive the data. When you're making a call as a post method, that's generally when you want to send data out to the external service so that service can make a change. So a good example of a post call would be if you wanted to create a calendar event on your Google Calendar. So within the call, you send the appropriate information about the event, like the time, the subject for it, any attendees for that calendar event, and you post that call to Google, and Google will update your calendar with that data. So that's a call with outgoing data. Put and patch are both methods that allow you to update data on the service. So let's say you wanted to update your profile picture on Facebook or update your bio on LinkedIn. You would use one of those methods. The difference between put and patch is usually to update existing data, and put is to update existing data, but if the data doesn't exist, it'll create it. All right, and also post is also for creating new things as well. That's generally what you're going to use post for creating new stuff. And then delete, self-explanatory, that's to delete data. A call might also require headers. in order to have the service approve you. Sometimes you need authorization. So a header is less about the actual call itself and the actual data that you're working with, but it's more about information about you as the person who's making the request, and also about maybe the format of your request. So it might, a header might also contain information about whether your request is in JSON or XML so that the service knows how to read your request. A call may also accept optional or even required parameters so that it can send you a very specific response, usually a filtered one or a specifically sorted one. So you would go to your base endpoint, but then you would append these parameters so that the response can come back with very specific information. Maybe it's filtered out some data that you don't really want to see. So if we go back to the countries example, and here's the endpoint for searching the list of countries by codes, by country codes. So here's the base URL down to alpha there, all right? So this is the base resource. But then we've got this codes parameter where you as the user can simply add just a list of country codes so that all you get in return are the countries for those codes. So instead of receiving, nearly 200 countries in your response, you can type in the specific codes that you want and you get only those countries back. So here we would only get those 3 countries back. So parameters can work a number of different ways, and again, the documentation for the service you're working with will tell you exactly what parameter options you have and if there are any required ones to make the call work. All right, so let's talk a little bit more specifically about how APIs would even be used in a Bubble app. So here are a couple of general use cases. When you're working with an external service, you can use a GET call to retrieve data from Facebook or Google or Slack and display that data in your app. You can also use a post call to update an external service with user inputs or with existing app data or with even hard-coded values that you insert into the request. So let's look at some more examples. With GET calls, you can retrieve public data to display in your app. You can also retrieve private data, but with these examples, I'm just going to use open API examples where you don't need any kind of authorization. So you can do things like you can get the most recent currency exchange rates. That's an API that's available out there. Or again, like I showed you before, you can get a list of countries in the world or even zip codes in your state. So there's actually an API service called Smarty Streets that works with zip codes and locations. And this works very similarly to the REST countries API. So your Bubble app would send a GET call to Smarty Streets to retrieve a list of zip codes. And Smarty Streets would return in response the list of zip code data in JSON format. Now let's look at an example for post calls. With post calls, you can do something that you're probably familiar with already. This is very popular on the internet, where you have apps update external accounts on your behalf. So let's say your email lets you create a Trello card directly from your email message. That means that you've given your email client access to your Trello account, okay? And you can do that in Bubble as well. So you can post calendar events in your users' Outlook or Google Calendar accounts directly from your app. You can create Facebook photos using a post call. So here's an example of the event flow. So your app would send out a post call with event information. So it would have date, time, the title of the event, things like that. So it would send that request to the Google Calendar server. The Google Calendar server will approve this request and create the event, and the event will show up in your Google Calendar. Also, as a part of this process, Google will also send you back a response to let you know that it was successful. Or it might not create the event and send you back an error and let you know what went wrong with your call. Maybe you needed authorization and you didn't provide it. Maybe something required wasn't provided. It really depends. Usually the service will outline in plain English what went wrong. But this is a sample flow of how you can integrate a Google Calendar action directly from your app, and your user doesn't have to go into their Google account to do that. Now, up until this point, I've been talking about using APIs in Bubble with external services, with the outside world. But there is a whole other side to this too. Bubble lets you use APIs internally. Well, what does that even mean? Basically, Bubble will let you expose your own app's data types as API resources so that you can actually make calls to your app from an external service, from another Bubble app, or within the app itself. So in other words, your app now becomes the requested or the called service. Let's take a look at some examples here. In this first example, we're going to see what happens when you have an external service call your Bubble app through the API. And a really common use case for this is webhooks. If you're not familiar with what a webhook is, it's basically a notification. Okay, so let's say that the external service is Google. And we're actually going to talk about your Gmail inbox. So if you receive a new email in your Gmail inbox, we can have Google send a post request to your Bubble app. And that post request will contain data from the email. So it'll have maybe the subject line, the sender, the body of the email, and it'll send that to your Bubble app. And in terms of a webhook, that's like a notification. So it's basically, Gmail's basically saying, hey, Bubble app, I've got this new email for you, here are all the details. And then from there, your Bubble app can receive that data and extract whatever you need to extract in order to perform other actions inside your app. So maybe you want to save that email content, or maybe you want to trigger a workflow within your app. So Gmail will notify, it'll send the webhook to your app. This is a post request. That's basically what a webhook is. It's a post call. Your app will receive that data, and of course it'll send a response back to the service saying, hey, yep, we got it, all good, or actually there was a problem, we couldn't read your request for whatever reason, there's an error. But also as a part of that, you can set it up to trigger whatever you want, save something in the database, or maybe run a workflow of some kind. So that's one example for having an external service call your app, and then you using the API for internal purposes like this. What this also lets you do when you're working with an external service is generally you can really create some powerful automations here. So taking the same example for when you receive a new email, instead of maybe running an internal workflow in your app or saving the information to your database, you can take that data that you receive from the post request and turn it right back around and trigger another post request out to another service. Maybe this isn't even, so my example here, I've got, this going to a Google Sheet, receive an email, you get notified, maybe post that email information in a new row in a Google Sheet, but this doesn't have to stay inside of the Google world. It can be maybe a new Slack message, or it can be creating a new Trello card with that email information. It can really be whatever you want because your Bubble app is like the hub here. So it receives information and then you decide what you want to do with that information from there. And in this example, we're creating like this little automated flow, this kind of conveyor belt situation where we get data starts, there's a trigger here, and the trigger here is a new email, and ultimately it ends up in a Google Sheet row, okay? A second use case for this is if you want to connect Bubble apps to each other, and you can do this via API. Bubble actually has a plugin that's specifically for this, but it uses all of the same API principles. You still use all of the call methods. It's just strictly for Bubble apps talking to each other instead of your Bubble app talking to an external service. So let's say that you have a second Bubble app here, this one in purple. You can request data from your first app, and then that app would send a response with the data. So when would you even want to do this? When could this become a powerful feature? Well, let's take a look over here. Okay, let's say that you have 5 different Bubble apps under your account. Okay, you have these 4 ones on the outside, these purple ones, and then the blue one in the center here. Now, each of these 4 apps allow users to look up apartment listings. And for each app, it's a different city. Okay, so instead of having to manage apartment listings 4 different times in 4 different databases here, you actually keep a centralized database for all listings for all cities under one single app. That way you can manage it in one place, you can add listings, edit listings all in one area, and you don't have to jump around from app to app, okay? So since each of these apps work with different cities, what you can do is connect each app to the central app and request the listing data only for that city. So remember, before we could add parameters and stuff, we can filter our requests so that the response we get is a very specific list of data. Okay, so let's say this app is for San Francisco. It can make a request to the central app and say, hey, I only want apartment listings for San Francisco. This bubble app will go through its data and send back a filtered response and only send San Francisco listings. This one would do Seattle, this one would do New York, this one would do Dallas. All right, so this is a really great example and use case for utilizing APIs in a really powerful way. And now we're talking about, just in the bubble environment here where one bubble app connects to multiple bubble apps, but this can just as easily be 4 different external services. I mean, if you think about how flight aggregators work, if this was Kayak and these 4 purple boxes were 4 different airlines, that's basically what's happening with the request and responses actually going in a different direction, right? So Kayak would request flight information from American Airlines, from Delta, from United, from Southwest, and those airlines would all return a response back to Kayak, and then Kayak would display the result. So all of these arrows could actually be flowing in the opposite direction where the 4 outside applications are being requested, and they all send a response back to the central app. That's kind of how an aggregating system would work. Now, the final use case of using APIs within your own Bubble app is through server-side workflows. Okay, so we're talking now purely internally. We're not working with any kind of external application. We're not even talking to another Bubble app. This is purely your own app calling its own API. Why would you want to do this? Well, APIs are server-run processes. Now, the benefit to that is the client doesn't have to be present. The user doesn't have to have their browser open. They don't have to wait around. You can set it up so that workflows intentionally are run on the server side. That way things can kind of happen in the background. This is great for workflows that might take a little while if the searches are complicated and you don't want to have your user waiting around for it. There are a couple different common use cases for server-side workflows in Bubble. The first one is you can schedule workflows, and you can only schedule workflows through the API. So, for example, you can have an email go out a week from now, or you can update the database a month from now, or even an hour from now. The point is that you schedule these workflows to run. They get queued up on Bubble's server, and when that date and time comes, those workflows will run, and you don't have to be present for it. Once it's queued, it will run. The second use case would be recurring events. So that's very similar to scheduled workflows. The only difference is that a recurring event happens more than once, so you can set up the interval for that. It can happen daily, weekly, monthly, or annually, depending on the plan that you're on. And you can also bulk edit your database. So you can set up a server-side workflow to make a modification to a very big list of your database records and have it all happen in a much more efficient process. So here's just a really quick summary of everything that I just went over. Basically, APIs allow you to have applications communicate with each other, whether it's 2 Bubble applications or whether it's your app with the outside world, Google, Trello, Facebook, any of that, anything that offers an API. This is the system that you want to use to connect the 2. With APIs, you can retrieve data, or you can request for data to be created, modified, or deleted on an external server, or coming from an external server. You can retrieve that information. And you can also expose your own Bubble API so that you can allow your app to receive calls from external sources or even from itself. Alright, so in the next video, I'm going to cover API tools and settings. Alright, so this video is going to show you where to go to actually make these API requests. So far, I've only just told you about how APIs can be used within a Bubble app, but in the next video I'm going to show you actually where to go to request data from external services, and also how to connect Bubble apps to each other, and how to expose your public API so that you can run internal server workflows or allow external services to make API calls to your app so that you can receive things like webhooks. And there's going to be a lot of really useful information there, so make sure to check the next email for the second part of this API lesson. And as always, thanks so much for watching. If you have any questions at all about anything that I went over in this video, please feel free to email me. We can talk through it together. And thanks so much, guys. I'll talk to you in the next video.